Hello, welcome. I'm Jim Marshall, the New Bedford Cable Network, and as we come upon the 20th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks on Washington and New York City, we're here at the Acushnet 9/11 Memorial to talk about the memorial itself, its impact on the community. It is it's probably the closest one here in Greater New Bedford, and I know a lot of people have been here. It's the 10th anniversary of that. Joining me is Fire Chief Kevin Gallagher, who was one of the many people who were instrumental in getting this project completed years ago, and obviously 10 years later now for that, it's symbolic here, and it's hard to believe it's been 20 years since the attacks took place.
Isn't it? If you are of a certain age, you can recall almost not only the hours, the minutes, but the seconds as well. And with the anniversary, the 20th anniversary here, I think it's even more poignant that we have a place to come and have a physical connection to what occurred that day, as well as to continue to provide to the community a teaching tool that we hope generations down the road will come by here and look and read and learn.
Before we get to the memorial, I want to talk to you about that day. You were a firefighter that day. You weren't chief
I was.
yet, chief a couple of years later, but you were a firefighter.
Correct. I was a call firefighter from the 80s into the 90s, hired full-time in 1995. My own personal recollections of that day was a tremendous amount of fear. I worked that night. During the day, I had a part-time job with a private ambulance company. And my partner that day, Tim Collins, is now the fire chief down the Cape and in Truro. And he and I were taking a patient to Boston from St. Luke's. We heard the screams in the rooms at the hospital, and we inquired as to what was going on. Saw the replay of the first plane into the tower. Decided to get our guy to Boston as quickly as possible. Listened to the radio, listened to the rest of the events unfold. It was breathtakingly frightening to see the number of planes that were circling over Boston by the time we got there. And those planes were obviously landing. We just didn't know what was going on that day. And when I think back to that whole event, I just recall the fear. And I don't, I'm not afraid to say that. I was frightened many times that day. Came to work that night at 6 p.m. for my night shift. Around 9 o'clock at night, 2 fighter jets flew overhead. I watched them go by. The phone rang, and it was an elderly lady here in town who I knew, and she was in tears. And she just wanted reassurance that those planes that she just heard were ours and not the bad guys.
You obviously have a unique perspective because you were a firefighter. When you saw, I don't think there's any training firefighters could do for that incident, and they train a lot. But as a firefighter, even though it's in New York, it still has got to be a helpless feeling knowing that there's not much you can do.
They were doing what they were sworn to do, which was to protect lives. The police officers, the Port Authority officials, the first responders at the Pentagon, they are totally in a different league. The men and women of the FDNY are truly beyond the gold standard, and their brotherhood, their closeness, carried them through those horrible days and years.
And I know that you've obviously talked to them over the years too, and the experience obviously must weigh on them greatly.
It's interesting. I have met several firefighters who were at the towers on 9/11. I always want to inquire and talk and find out, and they all have, at least the ones I've met, a very polite way of shutting you down. It's their memory, it's their very personal tragedy. They'll share a little of it, but they're not going to share much.
And the other thing is, you talked about the call that you got from the resident here. I mean, it's not amazing. I mean, it shows how it impacted even a small community in southeastern Massachusetts?
So I hung up the phone. We back then it was one firefighter on duty. So I was in the station by myself, and I hung up, and I thought the terrorists won that day because they created terror in the heart and mind of an elderly lady in Acushnet, Massachusetts. That was the game plan, was to terrorize us, to make us fearful, and they won that day.
This memorial here that we're looking at, just an amazing structure, and I know it took a lot of hard work. You were obviously chief by the point that this started, the design and the concept come up. Tell us a little bit how the whole thing started.
It was truly a remarkable project to be involved in, and to kind of be the coordinator, so I got to see every aspect of it. But it really started with an email that I received from a friend of mine from New York, who indicated that the Port Authority, who was in possession of the steel remains from the World Trade Center, were going to be making available to communities, and in particular public safety agencies, a piece of steel, for the purpose of creating a memorial. And it had to be a public memorial. You couldn't just put it in the fire station for the guys. It had to be something that the community could see. So I had my letter ready. I think I set my alarm to wake up after midnight so I could submit it on the day that they opened the window. And not shortly, it was several months later, we received notification that a piece of steel had been set aside for us with the instructions to go and pick it up. We had no design at that time. We didn't know what the steel beam was going to look like. We didn't know if it was going to be a tremendous piece or a small piece. So we traveled down in February to Kennedy Airport in New York City. One of the most remarkable experiences that I've had. This is before the museum was built. Mm-hmm. So all the artifacts that are in the museum were in the hangar, and other items that were still being considered for the museum, and others that were simply going to be, passed along to other entities. And we had the opportunity to walk through the hangar on the lie that we needed to use the men's room just to be able to get into the building. And the gentleman there knew that we wanted to see more, and he brought us by, and we stood within inches of the fire apparatus that were destroyed that day, the antenna that was on, I believe, the North Tower. It was there was not a word said, but there were many tears that flowed that day.
So Acushnet obviously has the application. They get the piece here, a remarkable piece. What happens now? You've got to get a design. Right. Plus, you also have other artifacts here.
Exactly. So we brought it home, and we had a procession of public safety vehicles from the town line.
That was a pretty remarkable day.
That was neat. And can I tell you, Jim, that I think the fire in our belly was really lit that day. We didn't expect to see, when we drove down South Main Street in February, in the early afternoon, people sitting on their front steps or in beach chairs waiting for us to go by. And there were so many people who stood, covered their heart, elderly gentlemen with their veterans hat on saluting. And it was then that I turned to Dennis Hudon from Acushnet, who provided the crane services. The steel weighs 2,700 pounds, so when it's moved, it was a big deal. And I turned to him, and I remember saying, I think we're on to something special.
It was, and I still remember the walk, or not the walk, but as you said, the drive. It was amazing seeing a lot of people here for that.
It was.
You did get the other artifacts. Tell us about that.
We did.
Too.
So we were just overwhelmed with the steel, but as we started putting together the memorial and the design, we thought, why stop there? So Senator Kerry was the U.S. Senator at the time. We contacted his staff, and they made arrangements for the piece of granite from the Pentagon. The first piece they sent us came in the mail, and it was as big as your fist. And it just wasn't adequate for what we envisioned. So that piece of granite is at the Acushnet Middle School It's been behind glass since the beginning, since it arrived. But when we contacted the Pentagon, they said, fine, come on down and pick one out. So I flew down to Washington, got clearance to go into the Pentagon to a fenced-in area where there was a mound of granite from the building that had not yet been processed. And really the only restriction was I had to carry it out of there. So the piece that you see here is pretty much the extent of my strength. It's heavy. And we shipped it out UPS and got it here, and then the stone from the impact site in Shanksville, the U.S. Park Service made that available to us. Again, we had to go and retrieve it, and I brought my family with me at the time, and we were able to view what is now the Shanksville Memorial way before any designs or construction happened.
What have you found that this memorial means, I guess, personally, and then just your reflection on what it means for the community, and not just Acushnet, but really Greater New Bedford?
So the first part of that is very easy to answer. To me, personally, this was going to be simply a memorial to the events of that day. And it's unique that you can come and touch all three artifacts from all three sites. And that's something that the artist who designed this wanted to have happen. But my personal takeaway was the true sense of community. It was remarkable being the hub, if you will. Everything that we received, everything was donated. And it didn't take any coaxing whatsoever to ask a company. Under the base, there's rebar and a metal cage that sits down, and we poured concrete into it for structural purposes. And that came from New Bedford Iron Works. And when I told them what it was for, they had it delivered to us, no cost. And it just snowballed from there. The landscaping, the pavers from Pavestone, the sprinkler system was donated, the granite markers, every single thing that we have here in this was donated by the community.
Mr. Houdon too, which was when you...
services. And this is a beautiful, like anything else, this is beautiful, but you take away the marble, and there are pieces of engineered steel that were donated. In a lot of work. Broder Machine Shop in New Bedford did the welding for us onto that steel pentagon-shaped base, and then it was welded on by their crew as well. But I think, just as an example, the construction guys told me we need to drill a hole 12 inches wide, about 8 feet deep, in order to start the process of being able to handle 2,700 pounds plus. So, we kicked around the idea, so we're going to find somebody with a drill, one of the big augers. And that evening, I was driving through Fairhaven. There was some repairs being done on street lights. Stoplights. And there was a company there with a drill. And I stopped, asked for the guy in charge, explained to him what was going on. And before they came home, he made a phone call to his corporate office. They said, do it. And they were here with the drill, and we had that hole dug before the day was done. That was the spirit, and that's what I will take 20 years from now when I'm an old man sitting on my front porch and this anniversary comes up. Obviously, it will be the emotions of the day, but I will never, ever forget the community spirit.
It's also symbolic that you have this memorial here, right outside the firehouse. And the police station used to be there too, back in 2003 too. It's kind of symbolic where it's located.
It is. This is probably the jewel of Acushnet's landscape, and we're perfectly positioned. Main and South Main Street is a heavy thoroughfare, and this was just lawn with nothing on it. Before the fire station was here, this was a park. That was just overgrown, and it didn't have a very nice look to it. So when the fire station came, this area became our lawn, and it was just ideally suited for a memorial such as this.
I'm curious, over the years, your office is right over here. Is there anything that has stood out to you, like as far as people stopping by, or just anything that surprised you, or what over the years?
People have not stopped coming. 10 years into this, regardless of the time of year, my office overlooks the parking lot, so when a car comes in, I usually sit in anticipation of somebody coming in. And when the doorbell doesn't ring, I've learned now that they're here. Yeah, and we have, prior to the September 11th, the date, someone will come here, as they have done every year for the last 10 years, and leave a rose at the glass marker. We don't know who it is. We don't know what time of day they come, but it's their solemn expression. And we're just so happy that people have an opportunity to do that.
I'm curious, you mentioned that this is an educational piece, and obviously you're a dad. There were a lot of kids, obviously, that weren't even born. How do you talk to kids about this memorial, about that day?
Well, when we built it, we had in the back of our mind that this was going to outlive all of us. And, I spoke earlier about me personally knowing the events of every hour, minute, and second of that day. At some point, we're going to be gone. And it truly will just be a history book. We like to think that the memorial will connect future generations. So the glass marker is the time frame, the timeline of the events that day. The 9/11 is discussed, probably not part of the curriculum, but it's discussed at the middle school level, and middle school teachers have brought the students here. The kids from St. Francis come over regularly. So it augments their education, but I think more importantly, how many families have driven by here and a child will ask, "What's that?" And then that allows the parents to explain it however they choose to.
I was thinking too about the kids, but you have firefighters, call firefighters, who were kids when this happened. And it must be sort of an educational piece for them too when you think about it.
Yeah. Isn't it surreal to have an adult conversation with someone who wasn't born when
It is. You're absolutely right.
the attacks occurred? My kids are 17, so they were 7 years old 10 years ago when we built this, and they were very much involved in it. But for them, it really is just history. It's not burned into the fabric of their lives like it is us. It's surreal that the 13 Marines that were killed were infants or very young children when the attacks occurred that started the war that they died in. That didn't happen to our parents' generation on December 7th, 1941. So that kind of continuum of teaching, and that's what I really hope that this becomes and is viewed as. It's a teachable moment when people come here, and we've heard that. I've been party to. If I see a family out here, I'll come out and just kind of tell them the story of the different artifacts that, like I'm telling you, and there'll be questions, there'll be follow-up questions, very basic questions. Right. But it's a great opportunity for a parent to provide that lesson to their child.
It must be gratifying, too, for such a tragic day that there are young people interested.
Right.
And you think, I guess there's some people that would think, we forget, but there are those young people that want to know.
Right.
And it's helpful.
It's helpful for them to have a place to come.
As you look at the memorial now, I know that every year you do have the ceremony on 9/11. I know that'll be here this year as well, as it always is. Is there any, I don't want to say different message on the 20th anniversary than what you've had in the past?
We didn't do it last year because of COVID.
Correct.
And in certain circles, I think we took some hits for that. If you remember, last year was so crazy, and we didn't really have a good handle on protections against COVID. So I had to make the call to cancel it, and that was a very difficult thing to do. With social distancing and being outside, and I'm sure people will be wearing masks, our comfort level is much higher for doing it moving forward. This year, I think it's twofold, right? It's the 20th anniversary, which is a milestone, which we will remember, but it's also 10 years since the effort that went into building this. And I'm starting to sketch out some comments for the memorial ceremony, and going through. I kept a copy of my speech from the dedication ceremony, and it's still valid. There's still people in this community that we want to thank for their efforts. Without them, going through the photographs that we've been posting on Facebook, and while the names may slip my memory, the face I recall of a gentleman. We have a gentleman in town, Joe Costa, who's retired, who showed up every day to help spread sand and lay the pavers and work with us, and he didn't have to. He didn't have to do that, and nobody was paid for it, but he wanted to be a part of that, and I think that's what I'm going to try to get people to remember during the ceremony is, again, that sense of community at a time when there's not too many examples of community spirit.
And I was going to say, probably the overarching theme is that on one of the country's worst day, you see a small community, not just this community, but like you said, there's outside community here. The sort of Greater New Bedford sort of show the good,
right?
And from where you sit, that's probably the best thing that you could hope.
So I think if you remember back to September 12th, what a different day in our lives that all was, right? We were still afraid. We still didn't know what was going on. There was still a lot of uncertainty. But I liked you, and I expressed that. And I remember going to restaurants where people were just talking with strangers, and there was this camaraderie and spirit that came from that disaster. And then I think we captured that again when we built this 10 years later. I don't want to think it's gone now. I think it's still there, but it's just so far in the background. We've let so much clutter our lives now that I think it's still important to remember September 12th. That's what I talk to my kids about. They know about the planes, they know about the terrorists, they know about the firefighters, obviously. But when I talk to them, I try to focus their attention on what life was like the day after, in the weeks after, and the months after.
I think that's a good way to end it. It's good seeing you. Thank you for doing this for us.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it as well.
Alrighty.
And this is the community, and we welcome everybody in the community to come and see the memorial.
Kevin Gallagher, Fire Chief here in Acushnet. Jim Marshall here with the New Bedford Cable Network. We want to thank you for watching, and we will see you soon.